he had done those reforms within the context of the church, he would have been one of the greatest saints of all time.
History shows that he was used by Frederick II, the Elector of Saxony, for his own purposes. That was the period during the rise of nationalism, and they were using that to try to, to solidify their temporal power and standing. And so Luther was not smart enough to figure out he was being used. He was a pawn.
Yeah. And that happens a lot today too. That continues to happen today.
Going back to the abuse, you've often said so many times that don't judge the church by Judas.
That's right.
Don't make your decision based upon Judas's.
Because there's a little bit of Judas in all of us that we always have to be on guard of.
That's right.
Every one of us has, that's our fallen nature. That's original sin. I know better. I want it my way. This is what I want to do. I don't like what God is saying. It doesn't work for me. I love the way, Andy, you put it. We're gold medal rationalizers. We could convince ourselves that whatever it is we do, God will understand. Yeah? That's
why we have confession.
That's why we have confession. Any other thoughts?
I think I had one, and then we got to talk about something else, and I lost it.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Wait another 20 years, it'll happen every hour.
The more I go along, the more it's. I don't know. It'll come to me. It'll come to me.
There was a very young man who went through RCIA a couple of years ago. Maybe 2 years ago at most. You know who I'm talking about, Carol. And pretty much every single day he is contacting me with questions about the faith. Now he's kind of a cantankerous guy, kind of he does his thinking with his fists very often instead of his brain, but he's getting better. The poor guy, there's no father figure in his life. He doesn't have a father. That's never, Andy could tell you all about that. That's never a good thing to not have a father. And he's kind of replaced me, lucky me. He comes to me every single day, And it was just he asked me some off-the-wall question. I get him on track, and he says he understands. And then a couple of days, just like 2 days ago, he said to me, the more I learn about Christianity, the more demanding it is.
I remember it was back when we were talking about the SSPX, or just like traditional Catholicism on the internet. I was watching this video. It was horrible. It was about the Divine Mercy. And man, they do not. I don't know if it's all SSPX, but they do not like the Divine Mercy.
Why?
They say it's. Well, they claim it's satanic. That is.
Whoa.
They say what?
The Divine Mercy, the
Saint
message?
Faustina. Yeah, they said Saint Faustina was like an agent of the devil and.
The church for a little while didn't allow our journal to be really approved.
Well, for quite a few years, the Catholic Church forbade that.
Right.
Because it was what they took. She was basically, she wasn't illiterate, but she was close to being illiterate. A lot of her diary, she couldn't think of the word. She kind of drew a little picture, a little figure. And that was and she only knew Polish, right? Mm-hmm. And that Polish diary was taken and translated in Italian. And that's how the church learned of it. And that translation was horrible, horrible, horrible. And they said, absolutely not. She's invalidating the sacramental structure of the church. That absolutely we can't. And it was devotion to the Divine Mercy was forbidden by the Catholic Church until some years later, someone who, I don't know the exact history, but someone said, let's get this, what she said in Polish, let's get this accurately translated. Then everything changed. Then everything was, she didn't say this, she said this, and everything was fine. So I don't know what they're looking at to say that.
I think the argument, I turn it off after a while, because again, it's such a beautiful devotion that it's crazy I mean, I was just watching it kind of out of shock that, and this, again, these, like, people on the internet, they don't come out and say that they're, traditional Catholics until you kind of dig into it. But they were saying that the big argument that he had was that as she was dying, she asked Jesus to save every soul that died that day. And he just went on railing about how, that was terrible and this and that. And it's crazy. I mean, it's... Yeah,
it seems, from what I hear of the SSPX, they like to send people to hell.
Yeah. I don't know if this person's SSPX exactly.
That doesn't sound very loving.
No.
What's wrong with asking the Lord to save everybody's soul that day? He doesn't have to, but
dare we hope that all men be saved? That's Hans Urs von Balthasar, a big colleague of Pope Benedict XVI when he was Cardinal Ratzinger. Von Balthasar again expressed that hope that God in His mercy will somehow save all people. Free will always is the underlying thing here. We are always free to say no, and God, being the perfect gentleman, is going to say, oh, that pains me, but okay, if that's what you choose, then I will let you do what you want. But of course, we could hope that even the hardest of hearts will one day repent and say, I'm sorry, Jesus, And the same, if you look at some of the, so those, Joe, you might be aware, coming from a Baptist, a Protestant background, a lot of the Protestants, like the Pentecostals especially, they say all the Marian apparitions, Lourdes, Fatima, you name it,
all from the devil.
All from the devil. All from the devil. They can't possibly be from God. And SSPX is saying this is from the devil. What camp does that put them in? Again, Protestant.
Yeah.
Well, and the great irony of that is, if you discount any miracle as being of the devil, at the end of the day, you end up discounting Jesus' miracles.
In fact, that's what the Pharisees said. They said He was doing it by Beelzebub.
By the power of Beelzebub.
Right. And that's totally blasphemous, basically.
Of
You're
course.
denying the Holy Spirit.
Of course. And even today there are the full gospel churches. You see a full so-and-so full gospel church. The full gospel, a lot of the Protestant fundamentalists believe that the miracles were only for the time of Jesus and the apostles, so that they could prove to the world that He is who He says He is. But once the last apostle died, the miracles ceased. Then there are the full gospel churches who believe that no, the miracles continue to this day. But see, that's the problem with the Protestant. They're all over the map, even to the point of saying a Marian apparition is of the devil.
Even within a single congregation, they're all over the map. Because like a lot of people, like in the Baptist church I went to, people would not doubt that miracles still exist, even though there were a lot of cessationists. But like specifically, if somebody was having some sort of prophecy, or like some sort of like if someone was able to heal by the laying on of hands or something like that, they'd be like, no, that's got to be demonic. But if they prayed and like the person went through cancer treatments at the hospital and the doctors and all that were involved, and the person like survived and their cancer disappeared, then that was a miracle. But you couldn't. But any like things that seemed like actual miracles could not be miracles. So there were miracles that were believed in, but they weren't
all over the map.
What you would consider to be miracles in like the traditional system.
That's why there are 50,000 Protestant denominations on the IRS tax rolls, because if you don't agree with something, you go start your own denomination. And you talk about the SSPX in Stark, not too far away from here. Stark is just down the road a bit, right? You have the SSPV. I don't know how strong they are. Do you know the SSPV? That's the SSPX is the Saintly Society of Pius X, right? The SSPV is the Society of Pius V. They're, the term sede vacantis? They don't believe there has been a valid pope since Pius V, I guess. And that's why Bishop Esteves put the Mercedarian priests there and allowed them to say the Latin Mass until Pope Francis went and changed, and there was the problems with the Latin Mass. Because the Mercedarian priests who were celebrating the Latin Mass in Stark, at St. Edward's in Stark, with the hopes of bringing these SSPV people back into the flock here. You know, it's not that you don't want to write them off. You want to get them back. You want to win them back. They're lost sheep, is what they are. And it's our job to go after. We're you know, Galatians 2:20. I live, yet no longer I. Christ lives in me. That means it's my job to go after lost sheep, just like Jesus goes after lost sheep. Every one of us has to go after lost sheep when we find them. Not to say, but to hell with them. They're going to hell. You know.
It just seems weird that a Sedevacantists would go to church to begin with. Because wouldn't they have to say that all the sacraments are invalid and everything like that?
Well, I guess they would say like like Daniel in exile, right? He was in Persia, the prophet Daniel. Yet he maintained the faith, even though there was no temple to go to. He would still turn toward Jerusalem and pray. He would still keep the morning and evening sacrifices in a pagan land. I guess that's kind of how they. I don't know very much about them. And they don't have a church. They meet in like a banquet hall, or they used to every Sunday. I don't know if they're still going or not. How many are left? But and it's interesting, you know, when you look at their website, men have to be in a jacket and tie when they go to the Sunday Mass. Women can't have a sleeveless dress. They have to have a dress, no pants. They have to have a dress below the knees. You know, they're very. I mean, I wish Catholics took their faith that seriously. Especially, you see people serving at the altar, Eucharistic ministers, and many of them dressed like, you know, there's a dress code to meet the president in the White House, right? If you're not dressed in a certain way, if you have an appointment, a meeting with the president, if you're not dressed appropriately, you don't get in, you know? And yet, to serve at the altar of the King of Kings, you know, we dress like we're going to work in the barn. Explain that one to me, you know? The bishop, you know, he was on that thing for a while, our Bishop Holmeyer, about silence in the church before Mass. That didn't really, and you know, I see it both ways. He didn't want the rosary said. He goes, that's distracting. If you don't want to say the rosary, you can't pray because the rosary is going to be distracting you, you know. And he was going to go on and then go take it to dress. I don't think it went very far with the silence in the church. And you know, most of the time, when I'm sitting there before Mass, a lot of our elderly parishioners, you know, they can't hear very well, you know. And so I get to hear what it is they're talking about. And it's like, how did you make out at the doctor this week? Did the test come out okay? You know, that's kind of a loving concern. For you know, you don't want to tell them, but Bishop said to shut up, so shut up. But it's true, you know. The same thing with dress.
Prudential judgment.
With the rosary, we have like a lot more people that come to the rosary than people that come for silent prayer before Mass anyway. Yeah. So the rosary gets more people to pray.
And it's not that, you know, it's not that distracting. It's a beautiful devotion, and it doesn't really, and it's not so loud or distracting that you can't pray something else if you want to. I mean, it didn't really ever build up much steam, the silence in the church thing. I don't know. When the bishop is here, I make sure I keep quiet and don't talk to anybody. But otherwise,
7:30 Mass is much better than the 5 o'clock Mass.
Yeah.
They're bad.
Well, that's when the elderly come to the 5 o'clock.
The elderly come to the 5 o'clock Mass. My mother used to go to the 5 o'clock Mass. She would love to go on Sunday, but she couldn't get going in time to get to a morning Mass. She took her that long to get moving. She would have to go to a 5 o'clock Mass, you know, Akash?
If you're still taking suggestions for like topics,
yeah,
could we do like a history of the liturgy as in like how it like essentially evolved over time?
Now that's going to take more than a class, you know. Here's the list. We're going to finish prayer because Audrey asked for a deep dive into the Lord's Prayer. We looked last week. If everybody was here last week? Yes, I think. We looked at the prayer to Holy Michael the Archangel. Right? It's not Saint Michael the Archangel. It's Holy Michael the Archangel. Then we started the Lord's Prayer. We'll finish the Lord's Prayer. And then Jack asked about contemplative prayer. You talked about the hesychastic prayer. Hesychasis is Greek for stillness. So the Orthodox monks of Mount Athos, they developed this thing called hesychastic prayer, the Philokalia, and contemplating on the Jesus prayer, you know, the Jesus prayer, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, just repeating that over and over and entering into that stillness. In the Western tradition, that's what we would call contemplative prayer. And so I started just the other day to put together some thoughts for that class, so we'll do that. And then after that, we want to continue moving forward. We could do the history of the liturgy.
And then you probably get into Andy's too.
Oh, Andy will. I won't do the history of the liturgy before Andy. Andy's, I forgot the dates. I'm going to be away those 2 weekends.
June 14 and 21.
June 14 and 21. He's giving the talk, hopefully in the hall, so that, well, we won't be in here. We'll be in. I guess that's the right thing to do it in the hall. I don't know how many people are actually going to actually come, to be honest with you, but we could try. And it's Islam, what every Catholic needs to know. Want to give us a little preview of what you're going to talk about?
Just briefly, I'm going to talk about the life of Muhammad, his biography, and things, significant events in his life, and how that reflects on his character and his religion that he founded. We're going to talk about specifically how that religion, how that vision was first brought to Muhammad. We'll talk about his theology and what is different between his view of God or Allah and the Trinity. And we're going to look at whether Allah and God, as we understand the Trinity, are just, names for the same thing, and they mean the same thing, and that we worship the same God. And spoiler alert, no, we don't. And then we're going to look at the Quran. And the various provisions of the Quran, how it's constructed, and how it was dictated and arrived at by Muhammad, and how Muslims view it. They view the original Quran solely in Arabic. The only valid Quran is the one that was originally provided in Arabic, and that God Himself, of Allah, wrote the Quran in Arabic. For some reason, Allah decided that Arabic was the divine language, and so that's how it was dictated. And then we're going to look at the development of Islam after that, and we'll see that Islam basically was spread by the sword. It was not brought by proselytism or people seeing how virtuous you were or how wonderful you were. For the most part, Islam spread by the sword, and history shows that it was a very aggressive and very hostile force against Christianity, moving through what was then Turkey and Greece into toward the gates of Vienna, and on the other side of the Mediterranean, they went up through Africa into Spain, and they got to Tours, France before Charlemagne finally threw them back. Interestingly, we all know what happened in 1492, right? What happened in 1492?
Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, Ferdinand and Isabel were only able to commission that and provide the funding for it because they had accomplished something else in 1492. That was when they got rid of and expelled the last of the Muslims from Spain. And the Isabel and Ferdinand were declared by the Pope then as supreme holy defenders of the Catholic faith for having done that and having preserved Spain for Christianity and not for Islam. We'll look at the Hadith. Hadith are sort of like the Jewish Midrash. They're commentaries on the life of Muhammad, and there's thousands and thousands of Hadith, which are just short little stories or vignettes about the life of Muhammad and what he said or what he did. There are three principal authors that are recognized as authoritative, and in fact, Islamic scholars regard these as almost right smack dab below the Quran. And so you're obligated to really know your Hadith, especially these three authoritative ones, and they are really eye-opening, to say the least. We'll talk about some of the things that are revealed there. And then we'll look at where Islam is today. We'll look at, after the death of Muhammad, there was a fight about succession. And succession basically branched into the Sunnis and the Shiites. And there was a disagreement about whether the successor to Muhammad should be one of the offspring or in-laws of Muhammad or Fatima, and whether it should be somebody else who was with him from the beginning as a disciple. And Shiites is from the term originally Shi Ali. These were friends of Ali, and he was martyred and killed by the Sunnis in Iraq, I think Karbala, Iraq, shortly after, the decades after Muhammad's death in 632. And so there's been just an absolute hatred between Sunnis and Shiites ever since. 10% of the world Muslims are Shiite, and 90% approximately are Sunni. They have a very different theology, a very different way of looking at things. One country that is really crazy is Iraq. Iraq is strange because although it is Arabic ethnically, not Persian, it is Shiite, not Sunni. Most of the world's Arabs are Sunni, but the Arabs in Iraq are Shiite, and it led to huge problems when we went in there in 2001 under George W. Bush, because we thought we would just establish Jeffersonian democracy with people that were like the Crown Prince and like the people that the Bush family knew in Saudi Arabia. No, they were Arab, and not Persian, but they were not Sunni. And so it led to the insurgency and all sorts of problems that developed. But that's been a source of problem. Now the Shiites will learn, follow, especially the ones that are today, follow what's called 12er Islam. And they believe that around 800 or 900 AD, that the 12th imam in the succession of the Shiite imams was occulted. That is, he was in the world, but to preserve him and protect him, he was made occult and hidden. And he's still alive, after all these centuries, but he's occulted. And when there's a catastrophic worldwide Holocaust, he will appear and restore Shiite Islam and get rid of all the infidels, i.e. you and I, and establish a that wasn't bad news. Establish a worldwide caliphate under this 12th imam. And so, during the Cold War, the Russians and the United States had what? The doctrine of mutual assured destruction, because we were basically rational. We were Christian rational, and they were atheist rational. But we were rational and decided it's not really in our best interest to initiate a thermonuclear war, because it'll be devastating for both sides. Not so the Iranians. Their religious leadership, the Republican Guard and the Ayatollahs and everything, they think that would be a wonderful thing. And so they're developing nuclear bombs, not as a deterrent, but to precipitate a global Holocaust, because that will reveal and bring back the 12th Mahdi, or 12th Imam, who will then usher in this perfect Islamic paradise.
Plus, Wayne, wouldn't a thermonuclear war, though, with the resultant nuclear winter, balance out global warming, and so all would be...
Well, that's why I think, that's why Greta Thunberg and a lot of people are so pro-Hamas and everything else. Let me give you one example from the Hadith that will tell you maybe something. You remember chapter John of 8, chapter 8 of John's Gospel? At the very end, some people say it was added to what John did. It was not really part of John's Gospel, where the woman who was caught in adultery, and they're going to stone her, and they tell Jesus, it's written under the Mosaic code that a woman caught in adultery should be stoned. Interestingly enough, what about the dude who was caught in adultery? Right? Should he be stoned too? But that was a little omission there. But so they're trying to set Jesus up. If he's going to say, yeah, stone the hell out of her, then well, what kind of a Messiah? What kind of a nice guy are you? And so he then comes up with the solution, of course. Let he who's without sin cast the first stone. And he was writing in the sand.
And it doesn't tell us the next, it leaves out the next line, though. What did Jesus say?
Go and sin no more.
No, he said, Mother, put down the stone.
Right. That part I don't think it's in John. But anyhow, he said, go and sin no more. They don't condemn you, neither do I. Go and sin no more. Look how he dealt with the woman at the well. Five husbands. And the one she's with now is not 5 guys, not her husband. But in the Hadith, this woman is caught in adultery, but she's pregnant. And so Muhammad says, well, we're not going to kill her for the sake of the baby. But they wait till the baby's born, the baby's weaned, and then they bury the woman up to her head, and then they beat her about the head until she's dead, to fulfill the obligations of Mosaic law. Now, isn't that slightly different than the way Jesus handled the woman caught in adultery? I mean, is that who you would admire? You have a man who was betrothed to Fatima and Aisha, I forgot the pronunciation, but when she was 6, married her when she was 6, consummated the marriage when she was 9. Muhammad had 13 wives, and every time he got the hots for a different woman, a different surah or chapter in the Quran would be written saying, Allah has deemed it appropriate for me to have this woman as my wife. Well, she happened to be married to this guy, and so Allah conveniently told this guy, you need to divorce her, and so she's free now to marry Muhammad. And you have to ask yourself, now Muslims would try to explain that whatever is allowed to the great prophet must be good, must be moral. But I mean, does that pass the smell test at all with any of us about something that would be morally consistent or morally repugnant? And so there's a lot of things we're going to learn about Islam, including, are you familiar with the satanic verses? You remember Salman Rushdie?
Yeah.
He got a fatwa declared against him because he wrote a book that went into the satanic verses. And basically what he did was point out to Muslims and to Christians that there's things in the Quran that are, in fact, satanically inspired. And we'll look at, in fact, the very, very first occasion when Muhammad apparently was encountered by Gabriel. He claims that Gabriel came to him and gave this message to recite, and that's what the word Quran means, to recite, to write, to proselytize. And the way Gabriel interacted with Muhammad raises some serious questions. How do angels interact with humans all throughout the Old and New Testament?
You're late.
Do you ever see in the Old or New Testament any case where an angel is acting aggressively or hostilely or hurting a human being? It's always be not afraid. And they're very, very gentle. They're very self-effacing. They do the will of God and they don't impose. Well, the so-called angel Gabriel encountered Muhammad in a cave where he was meditating and almost squeezed the life out of him. He couldn't breathe. Muhammad thought he was dying. This happened 3 times, and he was scared to death. And this so-called angel Gabriel was doing things that Muhammad himself thought initially was satanic. He thought that was a demon, not Gabriel. And an Aryan priest who was off the rails basically convinced them that no, it's all kosher, it's all good, and everything else. And we'll also learn that originally the Catholic Church considered Islam to be a Christian or Christological heresy because it seemed to derive from Arianism. And a lot of people think from the point of church history that Arius is the real father of Islam because of his perception. Arius said that Jesus was not God. He was not co-eternal. He was not the second person of the Trinity. He was a created being. We say begotten, not made. Arians say he was made. He was created, and he is subsequent to or inferior to God. And that changes everything because when we sinned through Adam, we committed an infinite sin because it's a sin against an infinite being. And who can atone for that but another infinite being, i.e. not us? And so Jesus was true man and true God, so he could perfectly atone for that sin. But if Jesus is not true God and true man, but just a really, really wonderful, special man, then you don't get there.
This kind of man?
You're talking about a finite person.
That kind of man.
That's right. Right. So we're going to learn all about all that, and I would really encourage you to come and learn, because Islam is not a religion of peace. I consider it to be Satan's rear guard attempt to undermine the gospel. The Christianity spread like wildfire. It spread through love. It spread through sacrifice. The first 51 or 52 popes in the Catholic Church all died martyrs. They would not renounce the faith. They died as martyrs, and that's how it was spread, unlike Islam. And I think that we need to understand where that's coming from. If something is not the truth, it is not from God, then it has inherently violence built into it. And we need to understand that. And we need to understand that it is not a valid alternative way to God. It is not. All of, if you really read it from a psychological perspective, is an alter ego of Satan. It's what you're really dealing with. And
God can't contradict himself.
That's right.
So if Islam was a valid religion, well, they denied the Trinity and they denied the divinity of Jesus Christ. There's a showstopper right there.
That's nothing. Jesus denied. Two of their big, huge lies is they say we Christians are polytheistic because we worship God and Mary and Jesus, who was just a person, and they say that is shirk or just a heresy, terrible in the Islamic faith, and so that is terrible, and they know that that's not true. No Christian, no Catholic, no Baptist, no one has ever said that. We revere Mary, but we don't worship her. But we worship the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. One God, three persons, not three gods. And they lie about that. The other thing they lie about is Jesus did not die on the cross. Some parts of the Quran say that Allah pulled a switcheroo. It was Judas who died on the cross. And some parts say that it only appeared that Jesus died. And all at the last minute kind of whisked him away and protected him and sent him off somewhere where we don't know. But got him out of Jerusalem, and so he didn't go to Golgotha. Somebody else did, apparently. And you're looking at all the historical records, the 500 witnesses that are talked about in the book of Acts, all of the things that our books and say evidence that demands a verdict and demands that we accept this, all of those things are rejected. They, against all history, against all eyewitnesses, against all logic, they reject that and hold to something that is, I won't say false, instead I'll say cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
You know, really? It's interesting. Two of those things you just talked about actually have a lot in common with modern evangelical Protestantism. And what I'm talking about is the Zionist wing of Protestantism. One is this idea of like, oh, let's bring about the apocalypse. You know, we got people advising the president right now, like that lady down from Winter Park, his advisor, Paula White. Absolutely nuts. She's in that whole Zionist thing of let's bring about the end of the world. Let's make sure that what's the holy site up there?
Mecca?
The rock.
Kaaba. The Kaaba. It's in Mecca, that big black cube.
Yeah, that the Zionists believe once that's destroyed, that will bring about the apocalypse and hence the return of Christ. So that's one thing that you said that's very similar. And the other thing you said that's very similar is this lie that Christians worship Mary. Also very similar to evangelical Protestantism.
That's right.
You can talk to 100 different evangelical Protestants and they can bring that charge and you can say, no, we don't. And in fact, here's our teaching document that shows that we don't. And they'll still say, no, you're wrong. You worship Mary.
and I think one purpose for the class is not just to understand Islam, because I found that very, very few people really understand the teachings, the person of Muhammad or the theology of Islam, and they're shocked when they find out what is really there, and they have a different attitude. We Americans tend to be very generous, accepting, and tolerant people. We basically, you know, I go to Rotary, and I'm there with Baptists, Episcopalian, a Presbyterian, a Catholic, like myself, other Catholics. We have a couple of Jews. We have a couple of people that are atheists, and we all get along. We work on projects, and you know, we don't declare footballs on each other during the meetings, and we basically live and let live. And we tend to think that because we live and let live and tolerant, that the other people have a truth. They don't have a truth, they have a lie. Now, how we deal with it, Deacon Henry's right. You know, in the Middle Ages, you can burn people at the stake if they don't convert to Catholicism. And, you know, that didn't really work that well. You can send people out, like the Jesuits, like St. Francis Xavier, who did great work working with people in different cultures and meeting them where they are to bring them to Christ and see that example. And those are things that really work. There's a doctor in Lake City, Mohammed Faisal, good friend of mine, and we go out to lunch from time to time. We talk about different things, and we bring up our faith. We talk about that. I share my faith with him, and there's so many times he says, you know, wow, that is so beautiful. That is so beautiful, and he'll be the first to tell you, he wants every one of these damn towel heads to go home. He said, America is the best place in the world. But these people that come from these hellholes and want to turn our country and our communities into the same shithole.
Oh, yeah.
He says that.
She's going to tell her mother now.
Yeah. He said, I want them all to go home. I want them to leave. They have no business being here. And, you know, that's just ridiculous. And, you know, his wife is very, very Orthodox. In fact, they built a mosque right outside of Lake City. Beautiful mosque. He took me for a tour. Architecturally, beautiful place. You know, but it's not real. But, you know, there are times when I feel like I can almost get him there. But I feel like what we need to do is stand up for our faith, explain what we believe, and actually live what we believe. Be people who not only teach, but live our faith and plant seeds. You know, what did Paul say? I plant, Apollos waters, God gives the increase. And if we do that and we do it right, God will take care of the rest. And who knows, between the moment of death and the moment of judgment, we don't know how much that is. We think there's no time at all, time ends. But maybe it's timeless, and there's an opportunity for people to see and understand, and people of good faith, people of moral grounding, people who are kind and generous, and live the Beatitudes, but they were not Christian. Maybe they have an opportunity to say, my Lord and my God, when they see Christ. And Jesus said, that's all it takes. Come on in. Who are we to judge? That's up to God. But we need to be able, as Peter's reading today says, to give a reason for our faith and to be able to defend our faith and explain it. And to do so with gentleness and compassion, and then let God do the rest. But you have to start with the truth. If you start with the idea that Allah is just another name for God, and Islam is just as good as Christianity, and all paths lead to God, then that's not being kind and tolerant. It's misleading people with a lie. It's maybe keeping people from becoming Christian who would become Christian. So, you asked for a brief synopsis?
You gave the entire class.
When you ask a lawyer for a brief synopsis, you're kidding yourself. You're never going to get a brief synopsis.
Also, don't assume when you run into somebody that's Muslim and you have the opportunity to talk with them, don't assume that like they know the Christian story.
No, they don't.
Because I've heard so many testimonies from Muslims that were living here in America and they encountered a Christian and heard the gospel for the first time, and they're like mind blown.
Well, Dr. Faisal, he's a doctor, great doctor, and he was so shocked when I told him certain things. And he said, "Are you sure about that?" And I pulled up my phone and showed him. So he said, "I didn't know that. I didn't know that." First time I met him, interesting story. He's my GI doctor, and I was in his office, and I looked on the wall, his plaque, and it said he graduated with highest honors from Albert Einstein College of Medicine at Yeshiva University. When he came in, I said, "You must be one hell of a doc." And he said, "Well, thank you. I've never seen you before. I've never met you. Why do you say that?" And I said, "If a Muslim boy can graduate with high honors from a Jew law medical school, he must be pretty damn good." And then he laughed. He said, "I never thought about that, but yeah." He's really, really swell guy.
And these poor people, their ministers are feeding them the misinformation. I love your story, Carol, right? Where you went with a friend to a Baptist church, and the Protestant Baptist minister up there saying these Catholics think they could count their beads on rosaries and get themselves into. Hey, people are sitting there listening. Oh, gee, Catholics think that. And you let them have it after the service. He all he did is get red in the face and put his head down. But I think that suggests he knew he was intentionally feeding them lies. He was intentionally feeding them lies. The Catholics think they could just count their beads and work their way into heaven if they count enough beads.
And what you'll see is that Islam bears remarkable parallels to another religion, Mormonism.
Yeah, so I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, because Mormonism also believes it's interesting because they believe that they believe in the keys, given to Peter and everything. They just believe that the church fell and then the keys were given again to Joseph Smith. And it's similar to what the Muslims believe in that, yes, Christianity was valid, but you people just screwed it up, and now we're being given new revelation to get everything right.
There's three big lies that Joseph Smith told, and you claim to be a prophet, you claim to have revealed knowledge and truth from God. You're setting yourself up for a pretty high standard.
Yeah.
If you mess up or miss something, doesn't that call into question your credentials? Well, he said, number one, that the Bible had been corrupted and changed and everything since the early patristic period, 300, 400 AD passed. Well, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we found that everything lines up and nothing had been corrupted. The second thing he said is that he had translated a book, the long lost book of Abraham that supports Mormonism. And they said, well, where did you translate this from? I translated from this. That's what you're saying is the lost book of Abraham? Yes. It turns out it's the Egyptian book of the dead, the funeral rites and liturgy for the dead, not Abraham. And the third thing, as he said categorically, he said this definitively, the American Indians are the lost tribe of Israel that wound up in the United States, except that DNA has shown there has nothing to do with Jewish DNA. They're Asiatic. They have Mongolian traces, Asiatic traces, but they don't have the Jewish markers. And that's just, these are just inconvenient truths, I guess you could say.
And all these battles that were supposedly fought,
yeah,
that they describe, but yet archaeologically there's no evidence.
Also, if you want to look at who he started out as a fraud. Mm-hmm. He committed fraud, total fraud. If you go to the Court of Common Pleas in Philadelphia, you still find a record of his conviction for fraud on a pretty massive scale against early colonial people. Back in the early colonial period, there were a lot of superstitious, stupid people who thought that the New World was magical, it was wonderful, and there's buried treasure everywhere. Well, he said that he had special glasses.
He had magic glasses.
Look into the earth and see the treasure. And okay, well, this 40 acres didn't have it, but give me some more money, and I'm going to look at this next 40 acres. I'm sure the treasure's in this 40 acres. If it wasn't there, we're getting close. Some more money. Yeah. And pretty soon people found out, like the Royal Nonsuch and Huckleberry Finn, that wasn't true. Well, Joseph Smith wasn't written out of town tar and feather, but he was found guilty and put in jail for a while.
Yeah, he also married a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
So it's weird how, those cult leaders like that, just, as soon as they get some power, they end up marrying underage kids.
And then you talk about another similarity between Islam and Mormonism is their violence. Now, today, everyone thinks, I've got a Mormon neighbor. They're such great citizens. They don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't even drink coffee. They're just wonderful people. And from a civic point of view, from a citizenship point of view, they're fine people. They're good people. But you know, their roots are far different. You ever heard of the Mountain Meadows Massacre? There was people going out west trying to get to California for the gold rush in their wagons, and when they went through a certain part of southern Utah to get to California, Brigham Young, you know, you've heard of the name Brigham Young. Brigham Young and all these Mormons dressed up as Indians and massacred all of these families, all of these pioneers, wiped them out and stole everything they had. Muhammad would raid caravans, he would kill people, he would slaughter people and steal what they had.
Buchanan was going to, if it hadn't been for the Civil War, Buchanan was getting ready for a military operation against them.
Yeah.
They bought a bunch of camels, which shows how much they knew, you know, about the Great Plains, that they bought a bunch of camels for this expedition. But
Utah was one of the last states to become, one of the last territories to become a state, because for years they would not give up the doctrine of polygamy. And they were finally told, you're never going to become a state, you're going to be basically a territory, we'll do what you wish. And they formally, through legislation, renounced polygamy. Formally, through legislation, denounced and rejected polygamy. They continue to practice it and continue to practice it to this day.
there's a pretty good documentary that was done in the 80s. It's like a cartoon that goes over their theology and talks about how, you know, if you basically are working to become a god of your own planet.
Yeah.
They believe
your own solar system.
That's why you got to baptize enough people that are dead. You can baptize dead people and become a god you become a savior of some planet somewhere. Yeah.
And God, the Mormon God and the Islamic God are both material gods. They're both material. They're not spiritual, they're matter.
Yeah, they believe that God was he was born as a natural man.
They alter they alter the prologue in the Gospel of John. When you first meet with them, they'll show you where it says in the Greek, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Mm-hmm. Their Bible reads, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God. That article A is not in the Greek.
Which basically gets you away from, like, so apologetically, you're still looking backwards, and there's no creation in that worldview.
Really. Matter just always was.
Right.
And that's why atheists and for years and years rejected and made fun of. In fact, they used the term as a derisive term, Big Bang. They said they believed in a steady state. The universe just always was. It had no beginning, just was. And for Mormons and Islamic theologians, it's the same thing. Well, if your God is material, matter, there's some potentiality in that God. And if there's potentiality, it can be affected. A cause can act upon it. Well, God, our God, is an uncaused cause. He is you know, if you know anything about St. Thomas Aquinas and how he analyzed it, it makes perfect sense. It can only be that way. But that's not so for Mormonism or Islam. They have a material God, and everything always was. And the thing that turns me off, besides everything else about Mormonism, is if you really mind your P's and Q's, and you dive with a magic underwear on, and your neighbor's in the temple somewhere, you get a solar system of your own to run. Well, I don't know about you, but that's not my idea of heaven. Running a bunch of people like me. I don't want to deal with Dagger for eternity. I don't want to deal with these people. I want to be with God. I want to be with the saints. I don't want to deal with people like
Andy, tell us what you really think.
I mean, that would be torture. And for Islam, you know, the 72 virgins, the thing was 72 virgins versus eternity. Can't you see some Muslim guy getting up in the morning and having like, oh God, number 37. I mean, wouldn't at some point, don't you go like, I'm not sure I really care for this heaven. That's not what I thought it was. It kind of, wouldn't that kind of resemble hell? I mean, it was also for Islam, you're not with God. You're not, you know, in John 17, verse 21, Jesus prays that we will live at the heart of the Trinity and partake of his divine nature. That's not Islam. You know, God, Allah does not hang around with people in paradise in Islam. You get wine, you get rivers of honey, and you get 72 virgins. And I never, somebody ever did ask, what the hell do women get? You know, 72 dudes? I can tell you, my wife was like, you know, one has been bad enough, and so she's not gonna go 72.
And you gotta remember, there's a big possibility those 72 virgins are actually trans. That's gonna be a punishment.
That's a definite deal killer. I'm definitely not gonna convert, no, just definitely.
Andy's gonna spend 2 weeks teaching us Islam. And shortly after that, Christy's gonna spend a couple of weeks teaching us heresies. This class is gonna get really confused.
Well, but if we study these other religions, you know, from an academic point of view, it's like any college course on comparative religions, and you learn something academically and intellectually interesting. But more to the point, it sharpens our understanding of our faith. It equips us to be faithful witnesses. It equips us to do what Peter says in today's reading, to give an account for the reason for our faith. It gives us a way to do apologetics, to be able to say, you know, do you know that your faith actually says this and this? Now, does that make sense? Because I've talked to Mormons. I've talked to them and I explained, and they said, well, that's not what we believe. That's not true. And I point out from their own literature, their own stuff, that that's exactly what they say. Oh, I never knew that.
I love to go to the cathedral. You know, there's a Catholic cathedral in Salt Lake, and it's beautiful. Like it's the decoration. It's like art.
And the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Oh, yes. Well, those are beautiful voices, right?
No. The actual Catholic cathedral there. It's like it's Art Nouveau. It's weird because it's not really a religious style, but it's like that turn of the century, you know, the Art Nouveau style. It's kind of like
Chrysler Building or Empire State Building, yeah.
Right.
Iconic.
RCA Building, yeah.
Right. But they have this beautiful, like on the side of the altar, they have, it's Galatians, right, that says, you know, he who speaks the gospel besides the one that we've given you, let him be an anathema. And I think that's such a great verse.
And even if an angel of light should appear and say something, that, you know.
That's the one. Yeah.
Which is interesting because an angel of light does appear and give further revelation, and we call it the book of Revelation. But the difference is it's not a different gospel. It goes with what we've already been given.
But you know,
the book of Revelation is the, after everything else at the end of time, after all the witnessing, after all the missionary work, after everything else, the book of Revelation gives us a glimpse of what the wedding supper is going to be like. And the Bible begins with a marriage and it ends with a marriage. And there's no new doctrine, but it's like, okay, now we're going to consummate the marriage eternally and perfectly. And that's the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is a wedding. It's a wedding in the form of a mass. The book of Revelation traces the actual mass, if you look at it. The first 2-3 chapters, the first chapter you have basically the Nicene Creed. What is the nature and qualities of Jesus? We learn that in the first chapter. Second and third chapter, we have a recapitulation of salvation history, and we have the readings, the Word. And then from there on, we're whisked up into heaven, and we see from a cosmic point of view all the struggles in the past and how they all arose, and how all the Nicolaitans and all the heresies arose. And we see that ultimately it's always Jesus Christ who has the last word, and with just a word dispels and eliminates all of that. And then he comes and says, "Marry me."
But I'll tell you something, every single one of us need to be very careful about. We had a man come through, then RCAA a couple of years ago, and he was great. His job made it so that he had to move away, but he purposely delayed so that he could experience the Easter Vigil with us, and he came into the church, and then he moved. And he moved to Virginia somewhere. And he tried 3 different Catholic churches. All of them gave him a cold shoulder. He tried to, join the community. People just pretty much ignored him, actually were outright rude to him. He tried 3 different Catholic churches. he was lamenting at his new place of work there how, gee, my parish in Florida was this wonderful, welcoming place. I loved it there, but here I'm getting such a cold shoulder. Well, his friend said, come to my church. He was a Mormon. He said, come to my church. You won't find that. So he went there, and he goes, I've never seen more gracious, welcoming people. Now he's a Mormon. That's us. That is us. Right? Remember that. I've had people tell me they went to a church and it was the first time they went and the last time they went because of how others treated them there.
It's why I'm always saying that this entire parish should be attending these classes. We can't teach our faith and defend our faith with ignorance. We have to know our faith. And we also have to understand their faith so we know what parts of their faith are true. Because there's a lot we have in common. But we can't defend our faith unless we really know our own faith. And I gotta say, most people out there, not even close.
All human beings are created by God with an orientation to seek Him. All the Psalms say that all human beings pine for the courts of heaven. We all have a yearning. We even though we do so and we grope in the dark and we grope blindly sometimes, we all are seeking God. Even atheists, there's no such thing as a real atheist, because I think atheism is closer to belief than indifference. But everyone is always seeking something, seeking an answer, seeking an explanation, and trying to come to a solution for the existential problem of life, death. They want something. They want beauty. They want goodness. They want truth. They want eternal life. Everything we do pursues it. Some of us pursue it the right way. Some of us pursue it the wrong way. Some of us pursue it with knowledge, i.e. OCIA Class. Some pursue it through ignorance. But we're all trying to pursue it. And we have an obligation, as Peter says, to be gentle, to be kind, and to preach the gospel in season and out in truth and in kindness and by our lives. If I tell people about Jesus Christ and I'm very, very gentle, but I'm a philanderer and I'm a cheat and I'm a scoundrel,
or a lawyer,
that strike would be bad enough. But it makes it hard to be a really effective evangelist. What does that person say? Preach the gospel all the time, and if you're at a loss for words, just be yourself. Just be a Christian. Sometimes you have to use words. Sometimes you just let your character show. And people will say, I like that person. I really admire that person. Why is that person that way? And then they find out. And then, God is they say, the hound of heaven. He's relentless, and He will find every which way to bring us to Him that He possibly can. At the end of the day, if we say, not for me, forget it, drop dead, He'll say, because you're created in my image and likeness, and because you have a dignity that is sacred, I respect that. And you're not going to be happy in heaven, so you're going to be in hell. Not as a punishment. God loves the souls in hell. He can only, always, and everywhere love. That's His nature. He cannot love. But He also respects our dignity and our individuality and the fact that we were created with a free will in His image and likeness. And if you say, I don't want any part of heaven, He'll say, okay.
I know, Carol, you probably remember in where the parish we lived in the Panhandle, we had so many high school students in our OCIA program. And it's because the nearest Catholic high school was in Pensacola, about 50 miles away. So all the Catholic students went to the public high school, and it was a good high school. But when we would get them in RCIA, we would say, so why are you here? Their answer would inevitably be, well, I have these Catholic friends, and I don't know what it is about them, but whatever it is they got, I want it too. And they tell me it's their faith. I want that faith. And so we had a lot of very young RCIA people in that high school, in that parish from the local high school. That's proper proselytization. to let people look at you and say, I want what you've got, how could I get it?
That's being salt and light, right?
That's right.
That's right.
But, Dean's right, we can't tell a Muslim, you're a Muslim, you're going to hell unless you convert. But by the same token, you can't deny your own faith. You can't say all of our faiths are the same, and we're all worshiping the same God, and we're all in the same boat. We have to be, as Jesus says, wise as serpents and gentle as doves. We have to know. That's why fishermen. Fishermen know exactly where to drop their line, what bait to use, and how to be patient, and how to wait for the fish to come. And we have to have some of those same qualities.
Except for Matthew, because somebody had to write it all down, right? One of them had to be literate enough to write it all down.
And then my problem is, as a lawyer, and by my natural temperament, I am very polemical. My first inclination is to go to verbal war and to define terms and argue and to relentlessly pound the other side into submission. Now, in a court of law, that works great. Now, proselytizing, I learned long ago when I was young and stupid and full of what and vinegar that didn't quite work as well. So I learned to be gentler and listen and shut my mouth and get into the other guy's head first and find out where they're coming from.
Don't say what. Use the word so Jane can tell her mother.
It's like Paul, when Paul appeared before the Areopagus in Acts chapter 15. He first went around and understood all their gods and their mindset, and he was able to pitch his appeal in a way that will ultimately, and there was one of them there who followed him. So you have to be careful. You have to know how to approach people and what to say at the right time, the right way. It takes people with maturity and patience and compassion, which when I was young, I had none of that.
Just one disclaimer on that though, Andy, because Muslims specifically respond a little bit differently, I've noticed, than like other religions. For instance, reason is important, but the firmness of how hard you believe something and how firmly you present it and how confident you are in it means something to a Muslim more so than it does a Christian. Like, to me, I think most Christians are more logic-centered. Not that Muslims are like anti-logic, but the assertiveness of their apologists are what they're looking for. So like, if you watch a debate with like a Christian and a Muslim, which I have greatly enjoyed watching, the Muslims are always like they're yelling, they're really getting into it. And when you're watching it, you're like, he didn't make a single good point. But the Muslim audience that's watching that is going, yeah, our guy's obviously right.
The Muslims also, you can say what you want about it, but they react more to strength, to the strong horse, so to speak. And if you're a metrosexual soy boy trying to explain something to a Muslim, it's not going to work. If you're a man, and my wife says I'm the poster child for toxic masculinity. If you're strong and masculine and assertive, that goes a long way with Muslims. And fortunately, I have all those all those good qualities.
But I will say, in that same parish that Carol and I belonged to many years ago, I had a good friend, a very good friend, we've lost touch now over the years, but was a Muslim imam. And I once invited him to come to RCIA and talk about Islam. Yeah? And this parish was in the Panhandle, right by Eglin Air Force Base. It was very much a military parish. And I announced to the parish that this guy was coming. Well, they all came prepared for him. I mean, you could see, but they were sitting there like, listen, okay. And at the end, when I said, okay, does anybody have any questions? The hardest hard-nosed retired general, whatever, was sitting there like that. He goes, I have one problem here. And he looked at the guy and he goes, I don't agree. I agree with everything you just said. How can this be? Because, you know, we're not talking about radical extremists here. You know, the people you're talking about, let's go blow up the Mecca, the bring on Armageddon, you know, that's Christian extremism. There's also Muslim extremism. He was not a Muslim extremist. He was a devout Muslim. And that somebody said, "Are you going to tell me that I'm going to hell because I'm not a Muslim?" He goes, "I pray to God that I make it to heaven. I can't say anything about you. I just pray that I make it, and I hope you do too." You know, not convert or you know, you could, and I know people in Christianity who like to cherry pick and say, you know, when Jesus said, "Do you think I came to bring peace? I came to set fire to the earth, and how I wish this was already aflame." Or if you love your father, mother more than me, you're not worthy of me. Or if you have two tunics, sell one. You could buy a sword, right? You could cherry pick the Christian faith too and say it's a faith of violence, it's a faith of hatred. That's biblical eisegesis. It's reading something in that you want, which we could never ever do.
Excellent.
Exegesis. We want to look at the whole picture and extract what is believed about it.
But keep in mind, unlike the New Testament, the Quran teaches that Muslims are allowed and encouraged to lie to others, to lie to Christians in order to convert them, in order to conquer them. And so they, you know, if Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, Islam says you can lie about what Islam is. You can lie about your intentions. I'm not saying this imam was that type. He sounds, you know, different. But there are many who try to soften that image and try to lure and lull us into a different understanding that they don't really intend. They don't really want to honor that, but they're trying to deceive. And Allah says it's okay to deceive non-believers in order to conquer.
What's interesting though is I think it's Surah 91. There's a passage where he says, if anything I've said here, if anything I've said has been an error, go back and look at I can't remember the scriptures, whatever they refer to as the biblical text, whatever the terminology they use. So it's interesting, he specifically says in the Quran, if anything I've said has been an error, go back and check it against the original scriptures. So that right there, there's a deference to the scriptures built into the Quran, which comes in helpful if you're having an apologetic discussion with someone that might not be likely to accept them.
One of the major analytical tools of the Quran is what is called Quranic contradiction, and there's all sorts of contradictions built in within the Quran because it comes from a person who was, you know, not really a nice person, not really mentally stable, and he basically wrote the Quran to suit whatever whims he had at the time. And of course, you and I all know that, you know, my whim today may not be my whim yesterday, and so it's not going to be consistent. You know, there's a lot of things that they claim about the Quran that the Quran itself does not support. They say it's perfect, it's without contradiction, without flaw, and it's totally true. Well, you know, fundamentally, the law of excluded middle. Something can't be A and not A at the same time. It's either A or not A, but it can't be both. And if you say that, then you're dealing with a lie somewhere. You're dealing with some falsehood. But with the Quran, it's riddled with things like that. And so, what's true? What's false? When was he speaking for Allah? When was he not speaking for Allah?
And even Muslim scholars will admit that they consolidated the Quran by taking all the other copies that were not as similar and basically having a Nazi-style book burning and getting rid of all of them.
That's right. Most of it was compiled and edited after he died, and there were various versions out there that were, you're right, they were collected and burned and said, this is going to be it. We're going to pick the one that works the best, sounds the best, and we're going to get rid of everything else. And they did. You have to ask yourself from a scholarly point of view, you know, what was in there? What did it say? What was it different? And, you know, what in fact did Muhammad actually say? What did he actually write? You know, did he write anything? Because on the one hand, he was hired by his first wife, Khadijah, to manage these caravans, and he was really successful. He did a really good job taking caravans up through Saudi Arabia into Jerusalem and Damascus, and he made a lot of money for it. Well, you have to keep books and accounts and everything else, but they say, no, he was illiterate, he couldn't read or write. But then he wrote some parts of the Quran. How did he do that? And how do we know what he did right and what he did right? You know, there's so many things that you have to believe so many impossible things that are illogical and inconsistent if you even want to hope to trace and follow Islam. And so at the end of the day, but it's kind of like Satan. You know, Satan was the father of lies from the very beginning. And that's what you have in the Quran.
Well, Andy, thank you for this brief synopsis of what you're going to talk about. You know,
don't have to come back.
No, you should go. And that's what I was wanting to say. Is his class on this topic was so insightful for me. I really had done no studying or reading around this faith, and it just really opened up my eyes to see that their God is not our God. That really every heresy is from the author of lies. There is always some truth, right? But I think it's worth, when Deacon Zamuda asked me to start teaching these classes on heresy, I was like, what is he gotten himself into?
She's become our resident heretic.
So I would do like 2 at a time, and I'd have to study.
You do a great job teaching heresy, Christy.
Well, that was probably one of the best things he ever asked me to do, was to take the time to read and study these heresies, because just as we take the time to read the Bible, it is good to study the heresies, because you see the difference between the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, and the spirit of darkness and the devil. It becomes very crystal clear, and you can just pick up on it. You start to pick on it like that.
And there are no new heresies under the sun. Everything that comes up today is just old heresy dressed in new clothes. That's all.
Fundamentally, there's two types of heresies. And there's an article in this website called The Catholic Thing, and this priest wrote an article last week that said, you know, the people either get God wrong or they get man wrong. If you don't understand the nature of God, His true nature, then you won't understand who we are as men. And if you get men wrong, you won't understand God, because we're created in His image and likeness. And so all heresies start off by getting God wrong or getting us wrong, and who we really are. And who we really are is we're so used to the mundane, we're so used to each other and all of our foibles and everything else, we really don't understand how, from a cosmic point of view, each and every one of us is an astonishing being in God's eyes. There's something about us that is absolutely mind-boggling in terms of our spirit, our minds, our bodies, and who we are. But that's part of the theology of the body, to truly understand that mysterious spousal nature of the body and who we really are. Because from God's point of view, we are just astonishing. From the scripture, we say angels are looking into the gospel. They're studying the gospel and studying us because they're incredibly dumbfounded. My guardian angel drew the short straw, and his experience has been white knuckle, I'm pretty sure. But truly, the angels look at us like we are, not the fallen angels, but the good angels. We are really incredible beings.
All right, it is after 11, so I guess we better start wrapping this up.
Okay.
We are going to continue with where we left off from last week. Bob, you may want to put that in the announcement that whoever was not here today, because some others. We'll get to page 3 starting next week. What else was I going to say? There was something else too, and I forgot. Oh, the books on the top shelf there just came in, so if you see anything you want, feel free to take it.
Thursday is anointing mass.
Thursday is our third Friday of the month, anointing mass and healing holy hour. If we'd love to have you come to that. And what else what other by way of announcements that Carol, anything that I'm forgetting to say? So we'll continue next week, and then as soon as we finish the Lord's Prayer, which Audrey asked for an in-depth look at the Lord's Prayer, Jack will go into the Hesychastic prayer, but from a Catholic perspective, not so much from an Orthodox perspective. So we'll do that, and then Akash will look at the history of the Mass. We'll look at like, Youngerman, the book by 2-volume Youngerman, the history of the liturgy. We'll probably
Michael Lane's Bible.
Youngerman is the Bible of the history of the Mass. Yeah, so a Jesuit from many years ago.
I think I have heard of it. It was a while ago. It's not like a recent.
Oh no, it's an old book, 1940s, 30s, or something like
Yes,
that.
I think I have heard it because I think Michael Lane uses some of it. He just simplifies it.
Yeah, it's a big book. It's 2 volumes, and there's even a 1-volume abridged version of Youngerman. So, I don't know how we're going to fit that into a week or two, but we'll figure something out. Okay. Anything? Then glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Bob, should I just leave this with you maybe?
Sure.
Because I don't really use it during the week, and here you
And I'm gonna put these